Seoul does not slow down for anyone. Not for the rain that falls sideways off the Han River in October. Not for the street vendors shouting over each other on the Mapo Bridge. And certainly not for Amara Cole, 31 years old, 5'4", 240 pounds of quiet, deliberate, invisible woman pushing a cleaning cart through the marble lobby of the Kwon Tower at 6:45 in the morning. She had been invisible her whole life. In Lagos, where she was born, her aunties called her the serious one, too serious to dance at weddings, too serious to laugh at jokes that weren't funny. In London, where she studied biochemistry on a scholarship she almost lost twice, her classmates called her intimidating, which was the word people used when a black woman refused to make herself smaller. And in Seoul, where she had lived for 4 years now, most people simply did not see her at all. That was fine. Amara had learned to work with invisibility, the way a carpenter works with the grain of wood with it, not against it. She knew every corner of Kwon Tower, every corridor, every service entrance, every floor where the fluorescent light flickered 2 seconds before it stabilized. She knew which executive left his office unlocked on Thursdays. She knew which boardroom had a ventilation shaft that carried sound from the floor above like a whisper pressed to your ear. She knew things because nobody watched her when she worked. And nobody watched her because nobody considered her worth watching. The lobby guard, Mr. Shin, gave her the same nod he gave the potted ferns. The receptionist, a girl named Yuna with perfect eyeliner and perfect indifference, looked through her like glass. Even the other cleaners, 3 Korean women who ate lunch together and spoke in the rapid shorthand of shared history, treated her with the polite distance of people, unsure what to do with someone who didn't fit the expected shape. Amara pushed her cart past all of them. She had work to do. And somewhere on the 42nd floor, a man she had never spoken to was already dying, and didn't know it yet. His name was Kwon Yi-won. 44 years old, 6'1", the kind of face that looked like it had been designed by someone who wanted to make a point, sharp jaw, heavy brow, eyes the color of deep water with nothing warm underneath. He had inherited the Kwon Group at 31 when his father died of a stroke mid-sentence during a board meeting, and in 13 years he had tripled the empire, buried 4 rivals, and never once been photographed smiling. The newspapers called him the last dragon of Gangnam. His own board called him something they only said in private. He wore his authority the way other men wore cologne, applied before leaving the house, present in every room before he entered it. When Kwon Yi-won walked into a meeting, people stopped speaking mid-word, not from rehearsed intimidation, from something older and more animal than that, the instinct to be still when something dangerous moves nearby. He was, by every external measure, untouchable. Which was why nobody noticed what Amara had been noticing for 6 weeks. The tremor in his left hand during the Tuesday shareholder briefing, brief, controlled, suppressed before anyone in the front row could register it. The slight drag in his right foot on the 3rd Thursday of last month, visible only from the service corridor where she was replacing a waste bin liner. The pallor that crept into his face between 10 and 11 each morning, regardless of how composed the rest of him remained. She had studied enough biochemistry to know what a body looked like when it was being interfered with. She had worked near enough powerful men to know what one looked like when he was too proud to admit something was wrong. And she had spent enough time in Kwon Tower to know that his private physician, Dr. Park Sung-il, had been arriving with a confidence that had no medical basis, the quiet satisfaction of a man checking on a problem he himself had created. Amara said nothing. She filed it, she watched, she waited. That was the thing about being invisible. You could afford to be patient. It happened on a Wednesday. The Kwon Group's annual leadership summit. 47 of the most powerful people in South Korean business packed into the 42nd floor conference hall, dressed in money, performing confidence at each other across a table long enough to land a small aircraft on. Amara was there because a water dispenser near the east wall had been reported faulty. She had been called up to check the connection behind the unit, a 2-minute task, quiet, invisible, done. She was on her knees behind the dispenser when the doors opened. Kwon Yi-won entered first, as he always did. Behind him, his deputy director, Oh Seung-min, leaned close and said something. Kwon's eyes swept the room with the casual sovereignty of a man accustomed to every corner belonging to him. His eyes found Amara. She was rising from the floor, cart beside her, notepad in hand, about to slip out through the service door the way she always did, quiet, quick, gone before she registered. He stopped her with his voice. "What is that doing in here?" Not who, what. The room went still in the particular way rooms go still, when the most powerful person in it says something that crosses a line everyone pretends doesn't exist. Oh Seung-min cleared his throat. "Sir, she's maintenance, the water unit." "I can see what she is." Kwon's voice was flat, surgical. "I'm asking why something that size is taking up space in this room during a summit." He looked at her the way people look at furniture that has been placed incorrectly. "Remove it." 46 people looked at their hands. Amara looked at him. Not with tears, not with the crumbling expression he was perhaps expecting. She looked at him the way a doctor looks at a patient presenting symptoms, with attention, with distance, with the calm of someone who already knows more than the person being observed. She picked up her card. She walked out. And she thought 48 hours, maybe less. Because the tremor in his left hand, as he dismissed her, had been the worst she had ever seen it. Her apartment in Mapo-gu was small enough that she could touch both walls of the kitchen with her arms extended. She did not mind small spaces. Small spaces had good acoustics for thinking. Amara sat at her table at 11:15 that night with her laptop, a cold cup of rooibos tea, and the photograph she had taken 3 weeks earlier of a medication vial she had found in the biomedical waste bin on the 42nd floor. The bin that should have contained only gloves and gauze and the routine disposables of a routine medical visit. It had not been routine. She had photographed the vial before disposing of it, the way her biochemistry training had made habitual: document first, discard after. The label had been partially removed, but partial was enough. Sodium nitroprusside, compounded, not pharmaceutical grade, in a concentration that had no legitimate therapeutic application for any condition Dr. Park Sung-il had on record as treating Kwon Yi-won for. She had spent 3 weeks verifying what she suspected. The symptoms she had observed, the tremor, the gait disruption, the color changes, the morning deterioration pattern, were consistent with one thing: chronic, low-dose, carefully administered poisoning, slow enough to mimic a degenerative neurological condition, fast enough to reach a conclusion within the year if uninterrupted. Someone was manufacturing Kwon Yi-won's illness. His own doctor was the instrument. And from what she had observed of the inner circle, the way Oh Seung-min moved through the building with increasing authority, the way certain board members had begun positioning themselves for succession conversations that were technically premature, this was not a lone actor. This was coordinated. Amara closed her laptop. She thought about the way he had looked at her that morning. Remove it. She thought about 46 people who had looked at their hands. She thought about the tremor in his left hand, his dominant hand, and what it would look like in another 6 months if no one intervened. She got up and refilled her tea. There was work to do. She did not go to the police. She had considered it for exactly 4 minutes before the logic closed that door. She had no formal standing. She was a contracted cleaning staff member, foreign, black, female, with a work visa dependent on continued employment. Any accusation she brought against the personal physician of one of South Korea's most powerful men, without ironclad proof and without protection, would not result in an investigation. It would result in her deportation. She went to Itaewon instead. There was a pharmacist there named Dr. Choi Byung-soo who had been struck off the medical register in 2019 for compounding medications outside approved channels. He operated a legitimate supplement shop now, the kind with too many plants in the window and a back room that smelled of solvents and careful decisions. He did not want to help her. She placed 800,000 won on his counter in an envelope, 2 months of her salary, and told him exactly what she needed and exactly why, in the precise clinical language of someone who had not studied biochemistry for 4 years to be argued with. He looked at the envelope, he looked at her. "You understand," he said in careful English, "that if this goes wrong—" "It won't go wrong," Amara said. "I know what I'm doing." She did. She had spent 11 days mapping Dr. Park's visit schedule, the access routes to the 42nd floor medical suite, and the precise window, 14 minutes on Friday mornings, when the suite was logged as vacant between Park's departure and the security rotation. She had spent those same 11 days working out exactly how to reverse 6 weeks of sodium nitroprusside accumulation in a way that would not itself become a medical event. She had the compound, she had the timing, she had the access. What she did not have was any guarantee that the man she was about to risk everything for deserved it. She thought about that for a long time. Then she thought about what right meant when it had nothing to do with deserving. She went in on Friday. 14 minutes was enough. She had rehearsed it so many times in her apartment, eyes closed, lips moving through each step, that her hands knew the sequence before her mind gave the instruction. Service elevator, 4th corridor, 3rd door. The medical suite key she had copied 3 weeks ago from the original hanging on the hook in the supply room where nobody thought to look because nobody thought to look at her. The suite was clean, cold, and empty. She worked without turning on the overhead light. The window gave enough gray Friday morning to see by. The IV port in the bedside tray was standard. The compound she had prepared was already drawn and labeled in her own shorthand in case anyone found it before she used it. She was done in 9 minutes. She was back in the service corridor in 11. She was pushing her cart past the lobby guard, Mr. Shin, at the 14-minute mark. He nodded at her. She nodded back. For 3 days, nothing happened. On the 4th day, she was mopping the corridor outside the 42nd floor executive lounge when the door opened and Kwon Yi-won walked out. He walked differently. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in stories where recovery is announced with violins. Subtly, the drag in his right foot was gone. His posture had a density to it that had been absent for weeks, the weight of a man fully inhabiting his own body again. He was on his phone, speaking in the low, rapid cadence of someone issuing instructions rather than managing symptoms. He didn't see her. Of course he didn't. She kept mopping. But then he stopped. She didn't know why. He had no reason to. There was nothing to stop for. She was exactly what she had always been in that corridor: furniture, background, negative space. He stopped anyway. He turned. And for the first time since the summit, Kwon Yi-won looked at Amara Cole, not through her, not past her, directly at her, with the expression of a man trying to locate something he couldn't name. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she went back to mopping. He started leaving his office door open on Fridays. Amara noticed because she noticed everything, and because the change was deliberate. Kwon Yi-won was not a man who did anything accidentally. The door had been closed every Friday for 4 years, according to the senior cleaner Mrs. Beek, who tracked such things with the institutional memory of someone who had outlasted 6 management regimes. Now it was open. She didn't change her routine. She moved through the corridor the way she always did, efficient, quiet, unhurried. But she was aware, in the way you are aware of a change in atmospheric pressure, that something in the room was oriented toward her. He was reading when she passed the first time. The second time she came back to collect a bin she had missed, he was not reading. He was looking at the door. "You," he said. She stopped, turned, waited. He looked at her with the same unreadable expression from the corridor. Up close, it was more complicated than it had seemed from a distance. There was something working behind his eyes that he hadn't decided yet what to do with. "You work this floor every day?" "Yes, sir." "How long?" "4 years." Something shifted in his face. Not warmth. Warmth was too simple a word for it. Recognition, maybe. The look of a man recalibrating. "What's your name?" She told him. He repeated it, not the way people repeated unfamiliar names to file them, but the way you repeat something you want to make sure you've heard correctly. "Amara." "Yes." He looked at her for another moment, with that same quality of attention, complete, unperformed, uncomfortable in its directness. Then he looked back at his papers. "The light in the east corridor has been flickering for 2 weeks," he said. "See that it gets reported." "It was reported 3 weeks ago, sir," Amara said. "Maintenance is backlogged." A pause. "I'll have it escalated." "Thank you." She left, but she could feel, walking away, that something had cracked open in that room. And she wasn't sure yet whether that was good. It was Oh Seung-min who made her hand move. She had been patient. She had watched the recovery. She had told herself that what she had done was enough. The intervention was complete, the poison was clearing, and what happened to the people who had orchestrated it was not her responsibility. She was a cleaning woman. She had her limits. She had her visa. She had a life she had built carefully in a city that did not make space for her easily. Then she overheard Oh Seung-min on his phone in the stairwell. She was 3 steps above him, invisible behind the fire door. His voice was low and clipped and certain. "He's recovering too fast. Park says the numbers don't make sense. Someone interfered." A pause. "No, we go back to the original plan. Board vote is in 6 weeks. If he's still standing, we trigger the scandal file. Either way, Kwon Yi-won does not survive this quarter." She stood completely still until he was gone. Then she walked directly to the 42nd floor. She had never knocked on his office door before. She knocked now. He looked up. The door was closed today. She had knocked on the closed door, which nobody did. His expression shifted through several things quickly before it settled. "Miss Cole." She came in. She closed the door behind her. She placed on his desk, in a clear document sleeve, the photograph of the vial, her written analysis of the compound and its effects, a timeline of Dr. Park's visits cross-referenced with symptom progression, and a transcribed record of the conversation she had just heard in the stairwell, written from memory, word for word, 3 minutes after hearing it. He did not speak. He read every page. When he looked up, the man looking at her was different from the man she had walked into, stripped of something, exposed in the way that only truth delivered directly can expose a person. "How long have you known?" he said. 7 weeks. "Why didn't you?" "I did," Amara said simply. "That's why you're still here." He asked her to stay. Not in the way powerful men asked women to stay, not with the layered implication, not with the negotiation of proximity. He asked her with the raw directness of a man who had just learned that the only honest person in his building was someone he had called a piece of furniture. She stayed. His office at 9:30 in the evening was different from his office at 9:30 in the morning. The city light came in at a different angle. The building emptied itself of performance, and the man sitting across from her seemed to have taken the silence as permission to stop performing too. He poured her tea. She had not asked for it. He poured it anyway, with a precision that told her it was something he needed to do with his hands. "Why?" he said after a long time. You could have reported it anonymously. You could have left. You had every reason to leave. Amara held the cup. She thought about the 18 versions of this answer she had prepared in the 7 weeks she had known. The clean version, the clinical version, the version that cost nothing to say. She said the true version. Because I know what it is to have people decide what you're worth before you've opened your mouth, and I know what it is to have no one in the room on your side. She looked at him steadily. I wasn't going to be one of the 46 people who looked at their hands. He was quiet for a long time. I said something unforgivable to you. You did. I would like to. You don't need to, she set down the cup. I didn't do this for an apology. I did it because it was right. Those aren't the same thing. He looked at her, fully the way he had in the corridor, that strange, complete, unguarded attention. No, he said quietly, they're not. Outside, Seoul hummed its indifferent nighttime hum. Inside, something shifted between them that neither of them named yet. 6 days later, the building changed. Amara felt it before she understood it. A different quality of movement in the corridors. People walking faster, speaking lower. The particular energy of an institution preparing for something it wasn't announcing. She had worked in Kwon Tower long enough to know its moods the way you know the moods of a person you live with. Something was happening. She found out what at 11:47, from the ventilation shaft on the 43rd floor. The board had been called for an emergency session, not by Kwon Yi-won, by Oh Seung-min, acting on a provision in the corporate charter that allowed a deputy director to call a session if the chief executive was deemed to be operating under diminished capacity. The medical documentation supporting the claim had been provided by Dr. Park Sung-il, documentation describing a progressive neurological deterioration that would, according to the report, render Kwon Yi-won unfit for executive function within 30 days. The documentation was fabricated, but it was very good fabrication. The kind with authentic letterheads and real diagnostic codes, and the particular professional confidence of someone who had been planning this for considerably longer than 6 weeks. The vote was in 4 days. Amara sat in the stairwell with her back against the cold concrete and thought very carefully. She had the original evidence. She had the vial photograph, the compound analysis, the timeline. But a cleaning woman's handwritten document and a photograph taken on a personal phone were not the same thing as the testimony of a registered physician with 40 years of credibility. She needed something that couldn't be dismissed. She needed it in 4 days. She took out her phone. She looked at the single contact she had added to it 10 days ago, after he had asked for it himself in a way that had surprised her, not as an instruction but as a request. If anything else happens, I want to know directly. She typed 4 words. It's happening, call me. 40 seconds later, her phone rang. He trusted her completely. That was the thing she hadn't prepared for, the speed and totality of it. She had expected a man like Kwon Yi-won to deploy trust the way he deployed everything else, strategically, partially, with conditions attached. Instead, he listened to her 4-day plan in full without interrupting, asked 2 precise questions and said, "Tell me what you need." What she needed was access to Dr. Park's private server. Park kept his real clinical records, the ones showing the deliberate administration of the compound, the dosage escalations, the communications with Oh Seung-min, on an air-gapped personal server in his consulting room. Not on the building's network. Not accessible remotely. Physically isolated. The kind of storage a man uses when he knows what he's doing is the kind of thing that ends careers and begins prison sentences. What Park had not accounted for was the cleaning schedule. Amara had access to that room every Tuesday and Thursday morning. She had been in it 41 times. She knew where every surface was, where every cable ran, and that the server tower sat against the east wall behind a filing cabinet that was moved slightly every time, when the room was cleaned. She knew what a USB hardware key looked like. She knew what a cold copy extraction device looked like. She knew because she had spent 3 evenings that week watching technical tutorials on a phone propped against her kitchen wall while she ate rice and studied. The way she had done everything hard in her life, alone, at a table, in a small room, with no one watching. On Thursday morning, she went in at her regular time. She was in and out in 7 minutes. The filing cabinet was replaced to its exact position. The server showed no access log because the extraction method she had used was designed to leave none. She walked back to the service corridor with the device in her uniform pocket, her face composed, her heartbeat the only evidence of what had just happened. She had what she needed. Now came the harder part. The board session was in Conference Hall A. 42 people. Dr. Park presenting his documentation from a lectern at the far end of the room. Oh Seung-min seated with the practiced gravity of a man who has rehearsed his concerned expression. The legal team arranged along the wall like a chorus waiting for its cue. Kwon Yi-won sat at the head of the table. He had insisted on attending. His legal team had advised against it. He had looked at them with a patience that was not patience at all and told them he would be there. He was there. Oh Seung-min began the formal proceedings at 2 o'clock exactly. He spoke for 11 minutes. He was good, measured, sorrowful in the right registers, careful never to appear gleeful despite being precisely that. The documentation was projected. The medical terminology was thorough. At 2:12, Kwon Yi-won raised one hand. He said, "Before we proceed, I'd like to admit one piece of evidence on my own behalf." Oh Seung-min's expression didn't change. It was too practiced to change visibly. "This is highly irregular." "Yes," Kwon said, "so is poisoning the chief executive." The room made a sound that wasn't quite a sound, an intake, a shift, a collective recalibration. The screen changed. What appeared was not a rebuttal document. It was a time-stamped clinical record, Dr. Park's own record, extracted from his own server, showing every dose, every escalation, every exchange with Oh Seung-min, dated and detailed with the meticulous thoroughness of a man who had never imagined anyone would be able to access them. 42 people looked at the screen. Then they looked at Dr. Park. Park's face had gone the color of old paper. "This was obtained," Kwon Yi-won said, his voice carrying the calm of a man who has arrived exactly where he intended to arrive, by the only person in this building who was paying attention. He looked at the door. Amara was standing in it. He had not told her he was going to do that. She had given him the extracted files. She had walked him through every document, every timestamp, every corroborating detail. She had told him what it proved and what it didn't and where the legal gaps were. She had done all of that and then gone back to work, because the work was still there and she was still the person whose job it was to do it. She had not expected to be summoned. His assistant had found her on the 38th floor at 1:58, 2 minutes before the session began, and said only, "Mr. Kwon requests your presence in Conference Hall A," in the tone of someone relaying a message they found personally confusing. She had gone. She had stood at the door. She had watched 42 of the most powerful people in South Korean business look at evidence she had gathered from behind a filing cabinet on a Tuesday morning, and she had felt something she hadn't felt in a long time in this building. Present. Now the room was looking at her. Oh Seung-min had gone rigid. Park was not looking at anything. The legal team was writing very quickly. Kwon Yi-won stood. "This woman," he said to the room, not to her, to the room, the way you make a statement you intend to be recorded, has worked in this building for 4 years. She was dismissed, insulted, and rendered invisible by every person in this organization, including me." He paused. "She saved my life anyway, not for compensation, not for recognition, because it was right. He looked at her directly. Her name is Amara Cole. She holds a degree in biochemistry from King's College London. And as of this morning, she has been appointed as a senior analyst to my executive advisory board, a position she has already been performing without the title, the salary, or a single person's acknowledgement. Silence. That ends today. Amara stood in the doorway of Conference Hall A. She did not cry, but it was a close thing. He did not rush it. That surprised her too. She had known men who moved fast after gratitude, who confused being saved with being owed, who translated debt into permission. She had braced for it, had her answers prepared, her lines drawn, the quiet architecture of her self-possession reinforced against it. He didn't move fast. He moved carefully. It started with the Friday doors. He still left his office open on Fridays. She still moved through the corridor on schedule. But now, occasionally, there was a second cup of tea on the small table by the window, not offered, placed, present if she wanted it, unclaimed if she didn't. She took it twice before she acknowledged it. "You keep making extra tea," she said one Friday from the doorway. "I keep hopping for company," he said, without looking up from his papers. She came in, she sat, she drank the tea. They talked about nothing important for 20 minutes, a report he'd read, a cafe she'd found in Seoul that did proper jollof rice, whether Seoul's winters were actually getting worse or whether people simply complained more. The small conversation of two people practicing the sound of each other's voice in a new register. It was the most ordinary thing that had happened to her in 4 years in that city. She did not know what to do with ordinary. She had spent so long being extraordinary in silence that normal human warmth felt almost suspicious, something to be checked before you trusted it. But he was consistent. Week after week, the tea, the open door, the conversations that asked nothing of her except her presence. He did not reference what she had done. He did not perform gratitude. He simply was there in the reliable way of someone who had decided to be there and was not going to be talked out of it. One evening in December, walking to the service elevator, she realized she had stopped bracing. That was the thing that frightened her most. His mother found out in January. Madame Kwon Soo-ya was 71 years old, had survived her husband's empire and her son's inheritance of it, and had opinions about everything with the precision and velocity of someone who had been right enough times to stop doubting herself. She found out about Amara the way powerful women in closed circles always found out about things, through the particular intelligence network of people who owed her information and paid it forward on schedule. She arrived at Kwon Tower on a Tuesday morning unannounced. Amara was in the executive advisory suite when the call came from the front desk. Madame Kwon was on her way up. She gathered her files. She was halfway to the door when Kwon Yi-won stepped in front of it. "Stay," he said. "This is your family. You are not leaving this room because my mother is arriving. I need you to understand that very clearly." She stayed. Madame Kwon entered with the particular composure of a woman who had decided her position before leaving home. She looked at Amara with the comprehensive assessment of someone accustomed to appraising things quickly. Then she looked at her son. "This is her," she said, not a question. "Yes." "The cleaning woman. The biochemist," Kwon Yi-won said, "who kept me alive while my board was arranging my funeral." A silence. Madame Kwon looked at Amara again, longer this time, the assessment recalibrating. "You went to King's College," she said finally. "Yes." "Why were you cleaning offices?" "Because the visa category I qualified for when I arrived was restricted to service work," Amara said, "and I needed to eat." Another silence. Madame Kwon looked at her son. Something moved across her face that was not approval exactly, too complicated for approval, more like a woman revising a conclusion she had arrived at before she had all the information. She sat down. "Make tea," she said, to no one in particular. Amara made the tea. 6 months later, Amara Cole sat at the head of the executive advisory table in a meeting she had convened. In a tailored charcoal blazer she had bought on a Saturday in Cheongdam-dong with her first proper salary, reviewing a risk analysis document she had authored in full. She had a title now. She had a salary. She had an office with a window that looked over the Han River and a business card that said what she was in plain language. She also had enemies. You could not appear from nowhere and sit where she sat without collecting them. A senior director named Baek Jun-seo had made his feelings known in the particular passive register of men who believed their feelings required no declaration. The late document submissions, the meeting interruptions, the questions asked to other people in the room about things she had already addressed. She had let it accumulate for 3 weeks. On the 4th week, she addressed it directly, in the room in front of everyone, with the specific data and the specific dates, and the specific impact on project timelines, in the quiet, unhurried voice of someone who had spent 4 years being underestimated, and had decided she was done making it comfortable. Baek Jun-seo did not interrupt her again. After the meeting, Kwon Yi-won fell into step beside her in the corridor. "Baek looked like he'd been corrected by the building itself," he said. "He had," Amara said. They walked in comfortable silence to the elevator. "Dinner," he said at the doors. Not a question this time, but not quite a command either. Something in between the register of a man who had learned how to ask her things in the language she actually responded to. She looked at him. 4 years in this building. 1 act of terrible cruelty. 7 weeks of patient, invisible work. A cup of tea on a Friday table. "Yes," she said. The elevator opened. They got in. Seoul waited outside, enormous and indifferent and full of stories it hadn't told yet. Here is what nobody in Kwon Tower expected. Not the board members who had looked at their hands. Not the security guard who had nodded at her like a potted plant for 4 years. Not the colleagues who ate lunch in a circle she was never invited into. Not the man himself, who had looked at her and said remove it in front of 46 witnesses. Nobody expected Amara Cole. That was always going to be their problem. Because the woman who could not be seen had been watching. The woman who could not be heard had been listening. The woman they had decided was nothing had been building, quietly, methodically, without audience or acknowledgement, the exact set of knowledge and courage and refusal to look away that the moment required. She did not save him to be rewarded. She did not stay to be validated. She did not love him to be transformed. She did all of it because she had decided, a long time ago in a small apartment in a city that did not make space for her, that the shape of her life was not going to be determined by the people who refused to see her. That is the story. Not the romance, though the romance is real, and it is earned, and it is the kind that comes from 2 people who have seen each other at their most exposed and chosen to stay anyway. Not the revenge, though justice did arrive, and it arrived completely, and Oh Seung-min is currently explaining himself to a prosecutor who is not interested in explanations. The story is this: invisibility is not the same as powerlessness. Being unseen is not the same as being nothing. And the people who dismiss you are building the walls of the room you are about to walk out of carrying everything. If this story held you, you are exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe to Don's Whisper and hit the bell right now. Every week, a new story arrives here: dark romance, power reversals, love that costs something real, and women who were never nothing, even when the world insisted otherwise. Don's Whisper, every week, never ordinary.